Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Springford Area School District voting meeting, February 27th. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Springford Board of School Directors believes the community has the right to bring before the board issues and concerns they may have about items on the agenda or about items in general which affect the district or their children. Because of this belief and philosophy, the board will schedule a time at the beginning and conclusion of every meeting to have an opportunity for community members to share their concerns with the board. At the start of the meeting, members from the public may comment on agenda items only. The school board will move through the meeting agenda, then at the end, when prompted, there will be a time for public comment. This meeting is being filmed to be broadcast on community cable channels and online. Individuals attending to make public comment should be aware that they are being videotaped. Speakers will be asked to state their name and the area in which you reside before your comment.
Good evening. Thank you for attending or tuning in. Mrs. Bickert, could we please have a roll call of who's in attendance?
Yes, in person we have Mrs. Deerdorf, Mrs. Hermans, Mr. Jackson, Dr. Motzer, Mrs. Weingarten, Dr. Wright, Mrs. Zazowski. On Zoom we have Mr. Schaefer, and Mrs. Earl is absent.
Thank you very much. And as always, Mr. Schaefer, I will do my best to defer to you as we go through today's presentations and voting.
Thank you for your patience.
No worries. Just in terms of announcements, the board did hold an executive session at 6:30 previous to today's meeting to discuss personnel matters. Mr. Rizzo, anything else you'd like to announce?
No announcements at this time.
Okay, thank you. So then we will move on to public to be heard on agenda items only. For anyone who wishes to make public comment, please approach the podium with your name and your township of residence. Okay. Oh, yes, we have one. Hello.
Yeah, press the mic button. There you go.
Jessica Reinholtz from Spring City. As the parent of two little ones, kindergarten planning is at the forefront of my mind. I hope you will seriously consider the presentation before you this evening to put full-day kindergarten in our elementary schools, as the benefit to our children far outweighs the cost. Research has shown it helps close the achievement gap, strengthen social and emotional skills, boost academic gains for students well past kindergarten, and students who participate have greater academic achievements in reading and math. Offering full-day kindergarten would make our school district even more desirable to new families considering moving into it. It would also offer our students a service that is provided to the majority of kindergarten students within our state. As my husband and I consider the future of our family and if we should stay in Springford, the decision of full-day kindergarten is definitely a part of that, as I'm sure it is for other families. Please make full-day kindergarten happen for our families and students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Michael Lebedzinski, Limerick Township, commenting on agenda item 4A. In the work session on January 17th, I looked at the meeting minutes. During that meeting, Margaret Wright had stated that there was research that supported the concept of community schools. And at the end of that meeting, one of the board members, was it Mr. Jackson or maybe Mr. Schaefer, had requested that research to be provided, and I believe the response was absolutely. I've requested that research that you cited via email, no response, despite that you had offered parents to email you. So I brought that concern up a couple weeks ago in the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting, I believe, and the first response from a couple of the board members, well, just email Margaret Wright, she'll send it to you. And I said, I did. and I've not received anything. So I went back in my emails and I found that this is actually the second time that Dr. Wright has made an assertion that research existed. So I'd like to see it. In my mind, it's an issue of reputation. If you state that there's research and you use that to back your opinion, let's see it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to make a public comment?
Hi, good evening. Mary Jo McNamara, Limerick Township. I am commenting tonight on Agenda Item 2, Section B, which is the full-day kindergarten presentation. I look forward to hearing the presentation, and I hope that we hear and understand, based on the presentation, not the presentation, the research or assessment that was done. I don't know how many years, I'm going to say 4 or 5. There was some question about whether it was 3 or 4 or 5, but there was a previous assessment done, and I know that that was an action for Mr. Rizzo to provide that or dig it up to provide it to the other board members. So my hope is that we see what that previous presentation was, what your new presentation is, and what the difference between those two things are. It would be good to see something measured against that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay. Well, with that said, we're going to be moving on to the presentation portion of our meeting, and I'm really excited to have Mr. Cifelli with us today and the cast of Hello, Dolly. So I'll turn it right over to Mr. Cifelli.
Thank you for the invitation, board, and this opportunity to promote our musical this year. Springford High School presents Hello, Dolly, March 3rd at 7 p.m., March 4th at 1 p.m. a matinee, and then again March 4th, Saturday evening at 7 p.m. For all faculty and staff at Springford, our final dress rehearsal is open and free as a preview to anybody who would like to attend and support their students. That is at 4 p.m. Hello, Dolly is a wonderful musical about people finding agency. And we thought it was particularly poignant as COVID starts to recede from our lives. We have these widows, Dolly and Horace and Irene, and they're trying to figure out what's the next step, right? How do we move on past tragedy? And so if you're somebody in the community that loves theater, that's looking for kind of a spark to get back into things, to find that agency again, we highly recommend you come out. Not only is the theme of the show inspiring, I must also add, what's particularly inspiring for me as a teacher, and I know I speak for my entire staff, is to watch 150 students put thousands of hours comprehensively into something as coordinated as a high school musical. That is just as meaningful to us as, you know, the themes of the show. It really is a remarkable thing. The set is spectacular. I can't tell you how many hours adult volunteers, they literally built a train for this show. A restaurant, a beautiful, gorgeous hat shop. If you've seen the movie with Barbra Streisand, you know the places that I'm talking about. So I'm gonna stop talking because you're not here for me. And I'd like to present our cast for Hello, Dolly here at Springford High School. Take it away, Mr. Perry.
Out there, there's a world outside of yonders, way out there beyond this hick town, Barnaby. There's a slick town, Barnaby, out there, full of shine.
You see what I mean? Chills in the room, and it's 2 hours of that. So we hope everybody come out and support them. They've worked so hard, and it really is a beautiful production, and it'll raise your spirits. So come on out, everyone. Thank you again for the invitation and an opportunity to present. All right, have a good night, everybody.
Thank you. Amazing job, amazing talent. Can't wait to see it in person this weekend. Thank you for all of your hard work. I know it doesn't feel like work when it's something that you love, but it needs to be said. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Cefali, and the rest of your staff, because I know that, there's a special place in my heart for folks who instill a love of music and a love of the arts, in our students. And I think it's easy when students are naturally musically inclined, but I think there's probably a huge subset of students that don't know that that spark exists. So thank you so much for all that you do. Thank you. All right, with that said, we're going to be moving on to our second presentation, which was at the will of the board back in, I want to say September, early October, with regards to an informational on full-day presentation of full-day kindergarten.
Yeah, I love following that, right? Speaking of chills, right? Well, good evening, community and board. Thank you for the opportunity to present this evening. As Ms. Herman's mentioned, excuse me, as Ms. Herman's mentioned, the board asked for a comprehensive presentation on what full-day kindergarten would look like. So we got together, pulled together some information to share with you this evening. We did share, for the benefit of the community, we did share the presentation from 2019, which is when it was last done, so the board has some comparison data to go with. The board requested this information and what the impact might be for full-day kindergarten. And again, through our lens, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, it's very difficult with all the different things that are kind of potentially happening in the district to really predict what that's all going to look like with full-day K. So our approach for this presentation was, if we were to make it happen right now, what would the cost be to facilities, what would the cost be to staff, et cetera, and what would be the educational value of doing that. So our lens is, right now, we are very much aware that the decisions that are made with full-day K will be made in conjunction with other decisions in the district, which would impact certainly personnel, which would impact facilities and costs and things like that. While we do acknowledge this is a fairly comprehensive presentation, we highly recommend an in-depth study into the impact and value and steps leading up to implementing full-day kindergarten. We've done a lot to prepare for tonight, but there's a lot more that would need to be done to really bring it to life. From a facility standpoint, we will need some lead time. Mr. Hunter's going to talk in greater depth about that, but we will need a few years to make sure that our facilities are ready to receive full-day kindergarten. In polling our administrative team, I want to share that a majority of our team do support the implementation of full-day K. All elementary principals support full-day kindergarten, but I will say this, they were all polled prior to the gathering of this information, and I don't know how they would feel after this presentation, so they just made a blind, basically gave me their impact blindly, or their opinions blindly. Tonight we will address the educational impact, and that'll be by Dr. Murray, the special education impact from Dr. Giambattista, personnel impacts from Ms. Leese, facilities needs from Mr. Hunter, and transportation and financial impact from Mr. Fink. Just again, kind of a level set. Trend data reveals that we see about a 14% increase in first grade enrollment from kindergarten. So our first grade classes are 14% on the average, larger than kindergarten. So we used to provide some flexibility and space with our enrollment, a 20% increase as our number. That's kind of the preliminary information. I will turn it over to Dr. Murray to talk about the educational impact. Dr. Murray?
Good evening. So I'm going to first begin regarding a research, a coverage of the research, what research is saying about full-day kindergarten. Through our digging, we found overall three major themes or three major groups that research has reported on full-day kindergarten. That is the academic content, knowledge, and skills, social, emotional, and behavioral skills, and executive functioning skills. And for the purpose of this presentation, the social, emotional, behavioral skills that we're referring to are skills such as that emotional knowledge and expression, the emotional behavioral regulation, self-awareness, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, social awareness, cooperation, recognizing social cues, and conflict resolution. An example of the executive functioning skills, again, this is a terminology we tend to use a lot in education, but for the purposes of ensuring everyone's understanding what we mean when we talk about that, we're looking at skills such as planning and organization, self-control, task initiation, time management, working memory, attention, flexibility, perseverance, and awareness of one's own learning and thoughts, which we refer to as metacognition. So overall, I'm not going to go into all of the individual research trends. There's quite a bit of research out there. And what I put on this slide here is kind of a summary of that research. What we found is that a lot of times the research is pointing to smaller class sizes may have a greater impact than full-day kindergarten. When we look at the areas of social interactions, emotional regulation, behavioral expectations, and executive functioning skills, a lot of research is pointing to the positive influences within those specific areas. The academic piece is a little bit inconclusive, if I'm being honest. We found some studies that showed positive effects, some showed little effects. We found some studies that showed more shorter-term effects, so that those effects might be evident at the end of kindergarten, but by the time students got to 3rd and 4th grade, that leveled out a little bit. We saw some studies that showed that both long-term and short-term effects exist. What we didn't find is any studies that pointed to negative effects outside of, as long as it's being implemented in an age-appropriate way, outside of some of the disadvantages such as cost, staffing, transportation, and so forth. One of the areas that definitely the research was pretty consistent with is that the advantages, the factors that may influence some of this research, which is why I suspect it's kind of inconclusive, is that it's really dependent on what the child does for the second half of the day. So if the student goes to an after-school care afterwards and participates in a second half-day program, it's very difficult to weed that out throughout the research. So I suspect that's one of the reasons why when we look at the academic advantages, it might not be as clear as what we really are hoping to see. We also found that how the time is used is really critical, making sure that the success of full-day kindergarten is focused on those early childhood education standards, making sure there's more focus on play-based learning. The other aspect that's important to know is that the only real measurement of some of the academic progress is in 3rd and 4th grade standardized testing. So some of the areas that are within the research are difficult to measure by nature. So that's just some of the research that we found. I know you can't read this, but we did pull a lot of articles. I thank my department for helping with this. But again, trying to look at the myriad of articles and research that's out there, and this is only brushing the surface. The other aspect we looked at, really what the research is pointing to is that us as a district, as a school board, we need to make that decision of what is best for us. So what you'll see on this slide is a comparison of what half-day in kindergarten and full-day kindergarten may look like. On the left-hand side, you'll see the current half-day kindergarten slide. Students participate in what's called morning meeting. If I can draw your attention to the bottom, where their core areas of development include physical activity, emotional, academic, and social. So you'll see morning meeting gives students the opportunity to engage in that emotional and social aspect for about 20 minutes. Students then participate in reading and writing for 60 minutes per day, math for 40 minutes per day, and then there's a rotation of specials, social studies, and science for about 40 minutes a day. In all, our students are participating in about 2 hours and 40 minutes within our current half-day program. Moving to a full-day kindergarten program would increase the overall school day to students to about 6 hours and 40 minutes. So you'll see here some of the content areas like math and ELA will have an impact. You would increase the amount of time by about to 120 minutes, so you're doubling the amount of ELA time, and you're increasing the amount of math time by 60 minutes. But I also suspect that's why some of the research may not necessarily be as conclusive, because those are the two content areas that are being measured in 3rd and 4th grade. So if I can draw your attention to some of the other areas that could potentially be added into this. Again, the research points to the fact that with a full-day K schedule, you have to take those early childhood education standards into play and making sure that students have opportunity for that play-based learning experience. You don't want to recreate first grade and just make kindergarten the new first grade. So you would see activities, again, this is just a sample. Students would have the opportunity to participate in all of the specials on a daily basis, which right now they are rotating through those specials. Students would have access to lunch, recess, science and social studies daily, and then an intervention block. The intervention block would be a time for students to get personalized interventions, either social emotional interventions, executive functioning interventions, or content area interventions as needed. We also did some work and gathered some of the perceptions of the Spring-Ford Area School District teachers on their perceived impacts of full-day kindergarten. So I want to put it out there that these are perceived impacts of that. We also grouped these into similar areas that we saw with research. So some of the perceived impacts with the academic impact is that we would see an increase of academic skills. Naturally, we would have an increase in instructional time. There's the perception that our students would be more prepared for first grade. The instructional interventions would be a little bit more available to students, and there would be more time for small group instruction, greater access to the curriculum and the curriculum resources that we're currently using, increased time for assessment of learning, which is when we assess to see what a student knows and understands so that we can then adjust instruction as needed, and more time and access to science and social studies. In the area of executive functioning, again, the perceptions is that there's more time for students to process information, so they're not necessarily fitting it within that 2-hour time frame, and that there are less transitions and disruptions. In reference to social, emotional, and behavioral, the perceptions is that there would be a reduction in the number of new first graders. So the idea that more students would attend kindergarten, so you'd be able to build stronger peer bonds in kindergarten instead of in first grade. There would be an increased time for that cooperative play and access to recess. There are some other considerations which didn't fit into the research themes that we found as well. Some things that we actually didn't consider as well. So the perceptions is that some students would now have access to 2 meals per day, which they currently don't have access to. Right now, only our students in the morning have access to breakfast, so they would have an increase there. We would also have an increased time for services such as occupational therapy, physical therapy, and speech therapy, where students would not be pulled from some of the core academic subjects, but they would be pulled during that intervention time perhaps. Also equity with regards to educational access during the kindergarten year, and I think that speaks to what the research mentioned about what students are doing at the other half day. The district would become more competitive with other area districts, and families will choose Spring-Ford instead of other private schools, and also a reduction in stress for families to figure out that second half of the day coverage. Again, I want to stress these are perceptions, recognizing that they are perceptions. So now I'm shifting a little bit to if we were to move in this direction and implement this, what other considerations would we have to be aware of before implementing? First and foremost, as I mentioned earlier, some of the impacts of full-day kindergarten are going to be difficult to measure. Some of them are not measured through standardized assessments, so we would have to give some thought as to, one of the questions we always come back to is how do we know this is effective? And that's going to be a little bit challenging, but it's something that I think we should certainly think through. For example, our reading and math are only formally assessed in grades 3, and sometimes some of those areas that we might be designating to are not formally measured, so we would have to come up with another way to really determine the effectiveness. The best practices in early childhood education is vital. We should not go in and approach full-day kindergarten as just the new first grade. We really need to do some work on making sure that we are comfortable with the extension of the day and how that impacts and reflects the early childhood standards. Extending the time of the day would also increase, again, more opportunity for structured play, not just solely academics, and that's really an important aspect. So as I mentioned, you heard me say a few times, to implement a full-day kindergarten program, we don't want to recreate that just new first grade. Excuse me. Projected costs for us to consider, again, these are just projections. We would need to do significant professional development to make sure that our teachers are prepared for a full day of kindergarten with our students. We approximate about $66,000. In order to be effective, we would want to bring our teachers in during the summer and do a summer program with our teachers, so that's where that would come from, as well as about $7,000 for curriculum building. This would require a rewrite of our current curriculum, so we would need to work on that. For additional teacher resources, right now we purchase each resource for each teacher. If we were to add full-day kindergarten, Ms. Lees will talk in a minute about the impact on staffing. That would also come with increased teacher resources. So we're projecting about $125,000 for additional teacher resources and approximately $30,000 for student resources and the consumables. We would also have potential technology impacts. Student devices. Currently, we are building an inventory based on our current enrollment to ensure that all of our students have a one-to-one device. We are projecting that students would attend kindergarten with us if we were to move to full days, so that may impact the amount of devices that we would need. So we would need to adjust our inventory as accordingly. If we were also to increase the number of classrooms, that would require additional devices such as smart panels. So for every classroom you would also add an additional smart panel, an additional teacher laptop, and some of the other apps or licenses that go along with it as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Giambattista to discuss the special education and early intervention.
Good evening, everyone. For this portion of my presentation, I am going to review the potential impact of full-day kindergarten and how it may impact special education. But before I begin, however, I'd like to familiarize you with the process of how our neurodiverse students transition into the district. There are a number of children within every district in every county that are provided with educational services and related services prior to kindergarten. These services are called early intervention. On the screen, you will find a very general description of early intervention. Early intervention services are funded under the federal mandate called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. EI provides programming and services to children who are eligible between the ages of 0 birth to 5. One of the 5 developmental domains that you will see up on the slide include the areas of physical, cognitive, communication, social or emotional, and adaptive. These all 5 developmental domains are worked on between the ages of birth and 5 years old before they enter kindergarten. The MCIU is the intermediate unit which services our incoming kindergarten students here in Springford. Through the months of January and on, much through February, we work collaboratively with the MCIU and parents through what is known as a transition meeting. These meetings are important to determine if a child will continue to need to meet the eligibility requirements for special education services prior to entering kindergarten. On the next few slides, I will review with you the 5-year trend data of students transitioning into early intervention from the MCIU. So if you look across the screen, across the top, the first box that you see is the total number of students going through the transition process prior to kindergarten. The numbers have remained relatively consistent, with the exception of, right now we're sitting at about 81 students who are currently going through or have gone through the transition process that are coming into kindergarten next year. The line below that are the students who are eligible for services as they approach kindergarten, but they will be able to remain in a half-a-day kindergarten program. They're generally the students who require related services, possibly in the area of speech and language, physical therapy, occupational therapy. The yellow line that you see below that are the students who are entering kindergarten this upcoming school year who have been recommended for what we call a full-day kindergarten. And that means that they've received programming on for a full day. Half of their day is in a special education classroom, and then the other half of the day they are included into the general education kindergarten classroom. Those specific 3 areas, autistic support, emotional support, and life skill support, are offered at only 4 of our elementary buildings out of the 7. So overall, you can see that our numbers of the full-time students coming into next year that require full-day programming has jumped quite a bit from previous years. But in the overall, generally speaking, in the prior 4 years, our numbers have remained pretty consistent across the board. Oh, sorry. Okay, that's how I was taking out. So as you can see, in full, looking at this data, which was an educational impact that full day would have on special education, ultimately, while our numbers have remained consistent for eligibility, they've peaked this school year. They don't really have a significant impact on whether or not we choose to go to full day kindergarten or we remain half day kindergarten. And with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Lees.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm here this evening to discuss what the personnel, the staffing impact would be if we move to full-day kindergarten. So currently we have 24 sections of kindergarten with 12 kindergarten teachers. 2 of those kindergarten teachers are split between 2 buildings. Moving forward, based on the projections that Mr. Rizzo had described earlier in the presentation, we do project the number of kindergarten sections increasing to 28. Accordingly, the number of teachers would increase to 28 for an additional 16 kindergarten teachers. As far as the special area teachers are concerned, your art, music, phys ed, those type of positions, our kindergarten students currently receive art, music, and phys ed for a half hour a day, 1 time per cycle. A move to full-time kindergarten would necessitate increasing those specials from a half an hour to 40 minutes. We would also add RamQuest and then a full library. Currently, our students at the kindergarten level do a 15-minute book exchange 1 time per cycle. By doing that, we do anticipate an additional need for specialist teachers, primarily at our larger elementary schools for physical education, music, art, library, and RamQuest. We do not have RamQuest at this point at Spring City, so we'd need to have it add an half position at Spring City Elementary School, which is why you see that 3.5 there. There would be additional need for school counselors as well, with an increase to full-time kindergarten. We currently have 9 school counselors. Brook Elementary, Limerick, and Spring City currently have 1 school counselor per building, and then we do have 1.5 at Evans, Oaks, Royersford, and Upper Providence Elementary Schools. Based on our projections, we do anticipate an increase at Evans, Oaks, Royersford, and Upper Providence to have 2 counselors, and then increasing by half a counselor at both Brook and Limerick Elementary Schools. Based on that, you're looking at an additional approximate staffing of 34.5 new staff needed for a full-time kindergarten program, which would be just shy of about $3 million, all in, including staffing, benefits, and taxes. The starting salary is currently based on Master's Step 3 on next year's salary schedule, knowing full well that we do not have projections for salaries moving past next year. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Hunter.
Good evening. I'm going to discuss full-day kindergarten and how it's going to impact facilities. I wanted to start off with some classroom data. Springford currently has 14 designated kindergarten classrooms. Kindergarten classrooms are typically larger than general classrooms and include a bathroom. Our current classroom capacity for kindergarten is 20 students per room. On average, we have 19 students per classroom in the AM session and 17 students in the PM session. The facilities planning information provided is based on student enrollment projections, forecasted space required, and estimated construction costs. I would highly recommend a full-day kindergarten feasibility study prior to making any decisions. We needed to remove variables from the planning process, so we used the following assumptions. Lead time to occupy a newly constructed space is a minimum of 3 years. Future growth is included in the enrollment estimate. Classroom capacity was reduced from 22 to 20 students for optimized student learning. 5th grade will not be moved into the elementary schools. Spring City Elementary remains open, and redistricting would be required. Students will not come in prepackaged groups of 20, and not all elementary schools will have available space or room to expand. We identified 14 additional classrooms for a total of 28 needed to support full-day kindergarten based on the projected enrollment. We have identified 6 potential classrooms in the district that could support full-day kindergarten as of today. Future needs, such as increased special education classes and elementary enrollment growth, could be competing for these same spaces. Additional space may be needed for specials and support staff, which is reflected in our estimate. Determining what schools are best suited for expansion would require a feasibility study. This cost model reflects 8 of the 14 additional classrooms being built as new construction. Ancillary space would include hallways and common areas, adult bathrooms, and mechanical storage and office space. Additional space for music and art are included in the 18,000 square foot estimate. The construction costs have been estimated between $550 and $600 per square foot, including fixtures, furniture, and equipment. To pay for this construction, the district would take on additional debt service estimated at $900,000 annually. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Fink.
So next up is, we'll talk a little bit about transportation. So switching over to full-day K from half-day K would mean we wouldn't have to do midday runs. So there's the plus, right? However, those, according to our contract, are cheaper than the morning and afternoon runs. So considering right now about half of our kindergarten students ride the morning bus and the other half ride the afternoon bus, we'd actually be adding about 310 students to the morning bus and to the afternoon bus to get to our total number, which would mean about 6 to 7 more bus runs each day. At that cost, it would be approximately the net out. So netting out the elimination of the midday runs and the addition of those morning runs would add about $232,000 according to today's contract. I'm going to touch a little bit on food service, although it has little impact, and it depends, right? If we had to add a lunch period because the building couldn't, a cafeteria couldn't handle all those students, we would probably go about $25,000 per year in the red. However, if we didn't have to add a lunch period, we wouldn't have to add any additional hours to our current staff in our elementaries, and basically we would probably go into the black about $100,000. So I get the fun job of adding up all the math. But we're going to break it out separately, right? So there's startup costs and there's ongoing costs, right? And I don't want to make it look like we're double dipping. In our pre-meeting, Dr. Murray pointed out, well, it sounds like we're double dipping if we put both the debt service and the debt, if that's the way we would have to go. But the initial outlay just for the building, depending on how you get it, whether that's debt, savings, whatever it is about $11 million, as Mr. Hunter just pointed out. And then, of course, there was a $66,000 for professional development and so on down the row, which would be a total startup cost of about almost $11.5 million. Okay? If we looked at how the budget would be impacted, we would get a little bit of extra revenue from the state, which would be based on the increase in those 85 or so additional kindergarten students we would have a couple years into the plan because it's a 3-year average. But it would, in the end of the day, it would come out to about $130,000 in additional revenue from the state. The different departments talked about additional costs. There would be the curriculum and so on down the road, personnel, The debt service, that depends on if we borrow the money or not, or how much of it we borrow. I'm just assuming we borrow it all. So the total would come up a little bit over $4 million added to the budget. There you go. Back to you, Mr. Rizzo.
So after the discussion, we would want to know which way the board would like us to go. If we would like to move forward, hold off, wait a little while, table, kind of see how the other things go with Spring City and some of the other larger items are. We would recommend, as Mr. Hunter referenced, we'd recommend a feasibility study. We'd recommend a deeper analysis into what that looks like, establish a timeline for when we would want to implement, and then kind of work backwards from there so we know what we need to do in interim steps along the way. So we're here, we're all here still. We're just not up to podium except for Mr. Fink, who, likes staying there. We're all here to have conversation and answer questions as you see fit.
So before I defer to my peers on the board for questions and comments, a couple of things. Number one, I know it was referenced that this information, or there was a presentation on the merits of full-day kindergarten done previously. So for anyone in the room or anyone who's listening in that hasn't seen that presentation was done. It was done on August 20th of 2019. It's about an 8-minute presentation by a former superintendent. I will say it was good context to understand what was mentioned in that conversation, because the then school board president did mention that, this is something that we need to reevaluate as we see districts moving this direction. It's always good to understand, what would it take? So I know that you just said something around, hey, what decision do we want to as a board? But I think right now, this is strictly informational purposes, right? There is no intent here to vote. There is no intent here to take action today, but to simply do our due diligence, because we know that there's a lot of facilities and planning related conversation that is coming down the pipeline. As we know, Spring City discussions more in March and voting in March. But if this is down the road, something that we want to move towards, let's get ahead of some of the data, although we know that there would, of course, need to be more comprehensive presentations and planning to be done. So let me just level set that here, that no action is being taken tonight with regards to this. And then the second thing is I am very happy, and I want to thank Mr. Rizzo and his staff for doing really kind of a cross-sectional presentation, because when you think of full-day kindergarten, it's not just property, it's not just finance, it's not just curriculum, but the fact that different from the presentation in 2019, where it was really kind of strictly from a property and finance standpoint, that we looked at this more holistically and comprehensively, so thank you for that. But with that said, I will turn it over to any board member that wishes to ask questions or make comment, and we can have, of course, our administration come to the podium again if we need to.
I have a few questions.
Okay, Mrs. Deardorff.
Also, I want to extend my thanks too. I think it was a very comprehensive presentation, and I really appreciate that. I know it was no easy task. I'm just going to jump through them. There's different notes that I took as people were speaking. I know that in some schools, I think, Dr. G, this one would be for you, there are ELD learners that are, and maybe this, correct me if I'm wrong, there's some ELD students that do a full-day kindergarten. Is that accurate?
We have ELL programming at Brook Elementary, and they do not do full-day programming. Our kindergarten students who are in the ELL program attend half-day.
Half-day, okay. Yes. Thank you for clearing that up. And then my other question, I think this one might be for Ms. Leese, regarding the increased need for kindergarten teachers. I know with the planning that we've been doing for our capital improvements with Spring City, there's some like live birth data and things like that about how our proposed school census looks like it's going to grow, plateau, and then decrease. So I'm wondering if when you talked about needing that increase of kindergarten teachers, would that fall along with then a decrease?
Again, the information that we presented this evening was based on certain assumptions. So if we were to go full-day kindergarten as of this year and next year, we would need an additional section of kindergarten at Spring City Elementary School. We currently have 2 sections. We would need to increase to 3. The more we delay the project and moving to full-time kindergarten, obviously that may change the number of sections required based on enrollment in the future.
Okay, thank you. And then did I hear correctly that Spring City does not have RamQuest? Is that accurate? Those students don't have that as a special?
That is not accurate.
Okay.
They do have RamQuest. Kindergartners do not have it. So we are looking at adding specialists. There might be some crossover between specialists as they go between buildings. So increasing RamQuest to kindergarten is going to put an additional burden on their current schedules. So we might need to add additional RamQuest teachers that might need to travel between buildings.
Thank you. That's all the specific questions that I have, but I do just want to kind of make mention that I take very seriously that this comes at a huge financial cost. And I don't want anybody to think that I don't, and I recognize that. And as I'm well aware, and I'm sure many of you are aware, it is our job to be stewards of our taxpayers' dollars. So in my ask of the district to do this presentation, it was not necessarily to say we need to do this and we need to get this done and get it done right now. But I think as we've talked about before with the trends in kindergarten and in education, that this is what the trend is leading to. And not necessarily we need to do it because it's trendy, but do we need to do it because this is what benefits our children the most? And how do we get there? Because by simply looking at just two factors, as I do feel like the previous presentation was a little bit limited, then the conversation ended, right? So I think this is a great way to start this conversation, and whether we do it in 5 years, whether we do it in 15 years, whether we do it in 50 years, Springford needs to be working towards that. And I'm, very open to discussing the best way that we can do that for our students and for our community as well.
Thank you, Ms. Deardorff. Any other questions or comments, Mrs. Zasowski?
So if we were to head down this road, what would that impact be to the thoughts on Spring City? Where does that take us with Spring City? Because I realized that we were trying to talk about Spring City, and then this kind of came onto the scene. But we do need to look at the whole picture here and understand before we can make any kind of decision about Spring City. If this is something that we're headed towards, I think we have to look at this wholly. Mr. Rizzo?
Right, so if you'll recall from the January 7th presentation, we did provide some data on full day K and the impact on facilities. Essentially, not to oversimplify it, but you could take a lot of different variations on a theme, so to speak. But for example, if we choose to close Spring City, you're closing square footage in the district. If you're going to implement full day K, you've got to find that square footage somewhere else. So there's going to be additional construction costs. If you choose to keep Spring City open without the addition, then you're going to have limited space at Spring City that's already pretty tight right now. And yes, we're looking at projections. Those numbers may go down in 5 or 7 years. But if we go with full day K, then we're going to need to make sure we have some space for that. You add the addition, that kind of alleviates that. And then you consider redistricting. So it all is tied together, and that's why we really felt like it was important to at least have a column on full day K, so that when you look at that presentation, it's column A plus column B plus column C to see the total outlay. And that's why I said a lot of this is impacted by some of the decisions that are made there.
Absolutely. I think that's very true. And I think, is it next month that we're going to be talking more about Spring City? So
yes,
this will remain fresh in our minds for that. And I guess my other thought was, I think everybody did a great job of laying out, the area that they are experts in, right? Your areas, and you really focused on that. I think you did a great job. And Kelly, in particular, or Dr. Murray in particular, with the, the advantages and the disadvantages, what the research does support and what it doesn't support. So then not that the board always does or does not do what the administration recommends, right? We have history, but what would be, is there any, and I guess this goes back to you again, Mr. Rizzo, is there any emerging thought on what the administration would recommend, or do you not want to go there tonight?
Well, that's not very fair.
I know, sorry.
Let me just say this. We did talk to our administrative team prior to this presentation. Our elementary principals certainly see a need to do this. Some of them, if they had it their way, they would do it next year because they see the value in it that much. Our job was to just make sure that we provided you as much information as we could at the time right now. And full disclosure, we did meet to kind of talk about this as a team. And after we went through the presentation, we're like, man, this really looks like we're not supporting full day K at all. But our job is to identify those barriers. So we wanted to make sure you had all the barriers. It's not that we do or that we don't. We know that there's a benefit versus cost, right? So is the cost, the addition, worth the value that we're going to get out of full day K? And I think I have to defer to the board on what they prefer. I will tell you that our elementary administrators support it for sure. I look at the whole budget. I look at the impact on our taxpayers, and I have to really think a lot about whether there's enough impact for it or not. So that's kind of where I am.
Okay, thank you.
Did I successfully skirt that issue, or?
You did a great job. And I do think, though, you could look at that presentation in a couple different lights, right? At one point, well, the research it's inconclusive, so maybe we don't have enough reliable and valid research to really move forward with such an expenditure. But then you don't want the cost to be the only prevailing factor either. So, and believe me, I'm cost-minded. I'm not saying that I'm not, and that definitely rules how I vote lots of times on things. But, we're trying to look at the whole picture. And it does kind of make me think twice when I see that the research just doesn't avail itself to fully and completely and utterly supporting this initiative. So.
And I would say this, I think we have fallen short of the expectation if you do decide to move forward with this and we just mirror what first grade does and bump that into kindergarten. I think we all acknowledge that we need to get a lot of input. We need to make sure that we're prepared to do it in the way that is best supporting students and not just the shortcut way of saying, well, first grade does this, now we're going to kindergarten and do exactly the same thing, because we don't think that's what's best for kids. So there's certainly a lot more work that would need to be done, and that experience for the students in kindergarten full day would be different than the first grade experience. At least that's in my opinion anyway.
And I guess just one final thought on that too. When we did look at this back in 2019, there was also, as I recall, some input about what the community may or may not want beyond the school district and the parents in the district and the impact educationally and financially to the district. But there was also some community input. Would that, if this was to go to the next step, would we be gathering that information as well? If I recall, there was some concern about some of the facilities or programs in the community that offer programming in that second half of the day, which, we have to be conscious of. So would we be considering that impact as well, or gathering that information for consideration also?
Listen, we love a good survey. It comes down to what the will of the board is. If the board would like me to gather that input, I would say, quite honestly, maybe I shouldn't say it. I'm going to say it. It's most important to parents of children who are kindergarten age or are going to be coming up to kindergarten. It's not as important for parents of children who are beyond kindergarten already, especially when you look at the tax implication.
Well, I'll just say, if we are going to do that at all, I would highly recommend a town hall meeting as opposed to a survey. And I'll just leave that there, and thanks so much.
Dr. Wright.
Thank you. And again, as the others had said, thank you very much for such a very thorough presentation and looking at all the different aspects. I have to say that listening to this, it brings more questions, I think, that we're all asking. I respect the other board members here who have mentioned that this is something that we need to consider. We need to consider the cost, but we also need to consider we're here to educate students. A lot of what I'm thinking has been said by my peers here as far as bringing in, definitely getting information from the community. I agree that a town hall meeting would be really a good opportunity. There's a lot of things that we do that are of interest to specific groups. I mean, we purchase things for the band and the orchestra and the chorus because we have many students that are involved in music. We have many students that are not, however. Same thing with athletics, and the same thing I think here with this. It impacts our parents of our kindergartners or potential kindergartners, but I think that there are many parents in our district that still see the value of that for our entire district. So it would be good to hear from that. I think that similar to the way that we do long-term planning on our buildings, our facilities, we need to look at this with the curriculum also. Consider this with the full-day kindergarten. More and more districts in Montgomery County and in Pennsylvania are moving toward full-day kindergarten. I have not heard of any that have moved back, have pulled it back, saying this wasn't for us. So that leads me to believe that they have found it to be a positive experience. I think it would be great for some of our administrators or staff to be able to go and visit some of the other school districts that have more recently implemented full-day kindergarten. Maybe that would be something moving forward as they gather more information with that. I am, pleased to hear that the elementary or principals have provided feedback, and I think the teachers also, and I'd like to hear, with the counselors, they are our, resident experts on the students. So we can sit here up at the board table and say what we think would benefit our students, but I'd like to continue to get their input on that. So I think this is worth pursuing, and I'd like to see some of the next steps that have been presented here. I think are good ones. So.
I do have a comment, but I'd be happy to defer to anyone else on the board that has questions or comments. Okay, we'll go to Jen and then.
I have two questions, if you can hear me.
I just also wanted to start by saying thank you so much for the hours that you spent putting this presentation together. Most of you are just getting to know me, but I did want to share that my doctoral dissertation was centered on full-day kindergarten, in particular those programs for at-risk students. I've also served on multiple dissertation committees at Immaculata University for other doctoral students who are pursuing topics around full-day kindergarten, and I've worked with OCDEL, which is the Office of Child Development and Early Learning through PDE. So I have done quite a bit of work in this area. I've spent a large portion of my career looking at the benefits of educating students and meeting their needs, in particular when they enter our school program. I want to comment on the research. It is very complex. We are dealing with very young children as we're doing this research in very different settings, different socioeconomic the socioeconomic status of an area impacts the research that is conducted. It's just very complex. So to only look at the results of these studies, I think would limit our ability to make a decision. For my dissertation, I read hundreds of articles on the topic. But it is a fair representation of the research that's out there. I also wanted to add that the staff perceptions must be considered. They are the people that work with these children every day. They know the ins and outs of that schedule, of the needs of the children. So that is a very valuable piece of information that we need to consider moving forward. Based on my research, the staff perceptions do match the research that is out there around the benefits to full-day kindergarten. There are other benefits that were not mentioned, so I would love to see additional information, a deeper study to some additional benefits as we move forward with this. And with a 3-year lead time, I think that's a really long time. I feel like we're playing catch-up as it is because there are so many other districts that have felt the same way we have around these big numbers. These scary big numbers have the same reaction, I have the same reaction to them as probably every other district that has moved from a half-day to a full-day program, but they found a way to do it. And I believe that the staff here, the board, the community will find a way to make this work for our students because we value our students, we value the educational system that will start them off on this career path into becoming adults. So please, I would love to see more.
I want to acknowledge that Mr. Schaefer is on the line and that he will be speaking next, right after Mrs. Weingarten.
Thank you. Given that we have I'm very impressed by our recent presentations in terms of looking at a lot of big projects, a lot of long-term, the capital planning. talking about Spring City, the 8th grade building, and how all of these pieces are going to fit together. I think Mr. Hunter brought up doing a full-day feasibility study in terms of facilities. I'm trying to get my head around how that looks in terms of timing and all of these moving parts. I imagine that it's a multi-layered, piece by piece, as we start to progress on some of these other bigger concepts. But can you give us just a little highlight about what that feasibility study might look like, or in terms of timing, what we might be able to expect, just to get a picture?
Yeah, what I meant by the feasibility study was to take into account our buildings and the space that we have. As I presented, we're looking at potentially 8 additional classrooms. We would need to find out where and what schools have the capacity to add on to for one. Not only that, I think we would start and look at our demographic enrollment data was from 2022. I think that needs to be looked at again to make sure that our numbers are current as far as enrollment are concerned. Because we're basing things on, I know that there was mention of the birth rate dropping off, but in our circumstance, the new construction, new homes that are coming in offset that. So I know that the data that we used from our last presentation, again, would need to be updated. And I think, it's important to recognize that that data should probably be updated every 2 to 3 years now moving forward, just to keep tabs on what the enrollment projections look like.
So does that sort of roll side by side as we start to make decisions about Spring City or 8th grade? How does that,
Well, I don't know that we took an approach right now for kindergarten in a feasibility study, honestly. I mean, that was one of the thought processes moving forward if you're going to really decide next steps. So that would have to have further discussion. None of our planning to this point, our 10-year plan, has taken anything into account for kindergarten. So this is, a decision that needs to be made moving forward, but it's something that we have to focus on and our energy as far as, a consultant potentially going in and look and get a deeper dive as to what it's going to look like. Everything that we've done based on the information that we have now is speculative, based on what we know now, the spaces that we have, and as I mentioned, those spaces could change with, increased special education classrooms, and then we would have to relook at it again and potentially need more space. So it's something that I think would have to be a directive, from the board to move forward with feasibility. But that, it's going to be at over a year's time probably before you get a deliverable on that, and what that's going to look like from the facility standpoint, and give direction as to where our next move would be and the schools that we could potentially add on to.
Thank you.
Mr. Schaefer, thank you for your patience. The floor is yours.
Sure, thanks. Just briefly, for now, I guess I'll just have questions. While I think the administration spent a lot of time, and obviously this was well thought out and well prepared by professionals, why was there no accounting for this $11 million in terms of the maintenance, which this board's aware of, that has to go into the ongoing support of new facilities, which we know would be permanent, right? So that question's possibly for Mr. Hunter, I guess. And then the second question would be to either Mr. Fink or Mr. Fitzgerald. If this roughly $4+ million a year was just layered onto our annual budget, which I realize is not what's being proposed, but if it were, because that was the exercise here, would this not require a special election or something that would go out to the public, because this would exceed the tax increase that the board is legally permitted to do? Those are my two questions. Thank you.
I'll take the first part of that. This is a presentation that's been made. There is no commitments that will be made at this particular time. To talk about a feasibility study, you're looking at minimal a year. And from there would be a deeper dive, as Mr. Hunter has made reference to. Then you're talking about an overall design that's probably 1 to 2 years. within that time frame, then you have to go before the township. So you're looking at anywhere up to 3, 4, 5 years before this will really hit the district, if the district decides to go that direction. So there, from the finance chair and the property chair, I don't see this coming online anytime soon, Mr. Schaefer. So I think we're safe to say that this will not exceed the current index as presented by the state.
I guess, thank you, Mr. Jackson. But my question was, if we did layer this right now, I'm not suggesting that there'd be enough votes on this board to do such a thing, but would that not require a special vote? Because I believe it's a 4.3% is the ceiling, and rough math, if we add another 4 million, and again, I just needed a clarifying question, that's all. And the first one, I would like administration to answer my questions too, please.
So yeah, the $4 million additional budget increase, or if we were to do this, that would increase to the budget in today's dollars would be a little under 3.5%. The index right now for this year, just for clarification, is 4.1. So potentially, if you were to go and do a project like this, depends on what that year looks like, right? As far as you're layering it in.
Mr. Schaefer, this is Mr. Hunter. I just want to clarify your question. You're asking why it wasn't, I'm sorry, there's feedback. You're asking why there wasn't pre-K, full-day kindergarten in our 10-year operations plan? Is that the question?
No, my apologies if it wasn't clear. I was writing down and it got to 4 million or something on an annual basis. There was roughly 3 million for personnel, $900,000 a year for debt service, right? I didn't see a line item in there for ongoing facilities maintenance attributed to this new 11 or so million dollars worth of facilities. And I think that's, as we're well aware at the board, that's an ongoing cost to take care of our facilities. And I just wanted to know why that wasn't there, or if you did an assessment and felt like it wasn't necessary.
No, our planning process was derived from our facilities condition index, a facilities condition assessment based on the needs of the district. At that particular time, we were looking at focused items at individual schools. During that time, I think it was mentioned in 2019, the presentation for the full-day kindergarten didn't really take much traction. And again, that wasn't tied into our 10-year plan. So I don't know of any other answer, but it wasn't, I wasn't asked or it wasn't included in that planning process.
Okay, well, I didn't get my question answered, but it's not significant. I mean, I'm not there, so I appreciate the opportunity to ask a few
Schaefer, I
questions.
think, this is Abby, I think I know what you're referring to. I don't know what slide number, do you have that up, Jen? The estimated annual budget impact slide, that one there, yes. So I think what Mr. Schaefer's asking is, in this total budget impact, why isn't there a column considering the maintenance? Is that correct, Mr. Schaefer?
That is correct. Yeah, thank you. Sorry if I wasn't clear. Again, thanks for the opportunity to ask questions.
I apologize. I'm still not sure of the question. I'm sorry.
I think what Mr. Schaefer is making reference to, our current budget for facilities is 1.5 mil. So out of that 1.5 mil, what is the projected cost that would be determined, or what would be arrived from if we proceed in this manner? Is that correct, Mr. Schaefer?
Yes, that's correct. So in other words, if we're adding $11 million worth of facilities, right, I think we have to attribute that there'd be some cost of maintenance in order to understand a full impact. That's all. Thank you.
So just Mr. Fink, you're saying that this 4 million would roughly be equivalent to about 3.5, on top of what we know is at least conservatively 3% organic growth year over year. Is that right?
That's accurate.
Thanks. Mr. Fink, so looking at this slide, you know, the full-day kindergarten decision is not one that or action, like we're not taking action on this because we know that there's a trickle-down effect. We need to address Spring City first, and the decision there will impact how and if and how we look at full-day kindergarten in the future, how and if we look at the 8th grade center or the potential reconfiguration of our middle schools. So when I look at this estimated annual budget and I'm seeing, you know, I'm hearing that we're going to have to build, you know, X square feet to support full-day kindergarten, that's based on a hypothesis here because depending on some of the decisions that we make down the road, so for example, with like the middle school, if it is the will of the board to look at a reconfiguration, and you know, there's a lot of different ways of doing that. You could look at, you know, moving 5, 6, 7, and having, you know, the 5 go to the elementary schools, or you could look at having a 4, 5, 6, and maybe making space for full-day kindergarten. So I guess my question here is, like, when we're looking at this number here, it's estimated based on assuming, like, taking nothing into consideration that we are currently doing today or thinking about with regards to the future of Springford.
Yeah, correct, using the old economics or economist assumption that all other things are equal. So, but there are a lot of moving parts that the board is considering right now, or at least in discussion on. Correct.
So in a way, I don't want to get the cart before the horse here because Spring City and what we do there will have impact on what this final budgetary impact could look like if we move forward with full-day kindergarten.
It would have some impact, yes.
Okay, thank you.
If you could simply take and talk to Mr. Hunter, we've created a 10-year plan for facilities, and we've laid out an approach and dollars required based on that approach. So you could take kindergarten and place it somewhere in that realm if you want to get some idea. I mean, when we laid this out, it was the priorities as determined by the district as a whole for which direction we were going to go. So it wasn't that this was just not included. It was we were looking at the district as a whole. So you can simply take this information here and place it where you deem appropriate to see where it fits in. And there could be some juggling of potential projects, 8 years down the road or 5 years down the road.
Right. And so I agree with you. And what I don't want is us to anchor to a number here like 4 million or building X number of square feet or having the community have this perception that that's what it's going to take to do it when we know that there are going to be future decisions that are going to impact really what this would look like if we move forward.
This is a best guess used on a certain square footage cost. It's a very simplistic approach to creating what ifs. This could change 2 years from now based on the economy. This could change based on what we do moving forward with the other facilities. This is your best guess. And this isn't everything that we will potentially be impacted by. This is what we think as of right now. So.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Any other comments or questions? Ms. Mengel.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to thank everyone who was involved with the presentation. I think this is something very valuable as a student myself, and having experienced the half-day structure of kindergarten, it's really valuable to see how Springford is now looking to implement potentially the full-day structure. And I think as a student also it's very inspiring just to see all these various fields of expertise merge together and come to bring such a great presentation. And if I could add, I guess when I'm looking at my own education in retrospect, I think it's just really valuable. Like I've seen in the presentation, you have emphasis on social and emotional learning and these aspects that are really important for the development of any child. And I think I would have loved to have that, like in the long-term development and what I could have achieved. Also because students are coming from all different backgrounds into their kindergarten education. And if we do implement this, it will give us another year for, I guess, more academic equity to occur and students to have more of an equal platform going in to, like Dr. Murray mentioned, like the standardized test that occurred during 3rd and 4th grade. So I just want to thank you all and provide, I guess, my thoughts on like how valuable I think that could be. And thank you again.
Thank you, Ms. Mengel, for sharing your perspective. Appreciate that. Okay. Any other questions for our administration or comments? Okay. Thank you very much. So moving on, we're going to move on to board and committee reports. And before we go to community relations and extracurricular, I do want to acknowledge that I believe last week, Mr. Schaefer, you had made a comment with regards to, there was an action item that we were talking through that it would have been really helpful to have the extracurricular readout, prior to getting to that action item on the agenda and vetting it amongst the board. And at the recommendation of Mr. Rizzo here, I do want to say that that was a comment that was taken to heart because, as you know, our work sessions is really where we, open up the discussion to some healthy debate. And moving forward, Mr. Rizzo is recommending that with regards to our standing committee meetings, finance, property, curriculum and technology, as well as community relations and extracurricular, which again, normally isn't on the agenda because they alternate, that we will have those reports at our work sessions so that when we go through the agenda and we start asking questions, we will have all the information. Hopefully it'll minimize some of that. So I want to thank Mr. Schaefer for bringing that to our attention. And with that said, at our voting meeting, we would then have our legislative, our MCIU, our PSBA, American Legion, and so forth. So we're not necessarily adding too much. We're just reconfiguring so that we have the most information as possible coming into this voting meeting on a monthly basis. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Zazowski for community relations.
So Community Relations Committee met on Tuesday, February 7th at 6:30 in the district office. Mr. Rothermel provided an extensive update on new projects, 2 of them to move forward for purchase this school year. The first is the purchase of 3 new camera pedestals. The pedestals currently used or at the end of life are broken to the point that they are unusable. 2 of the 3 would be purchased through budgeted RCTV and AV funds, and the third would be purchased by the EITC funds. I did reference this last week also. The second project is the renovation of the Steve Bonnet's television studio. Mr. Rothermel stated the history of the studio. We shared that, which has not been renovated since it was created in August of 2000. And he also, Mr. Rothermel also detailed how this change would benefit our students. In addition, Springford submitted 13 items this year for the upcoming Excellence in Communication contests. Excuse me, it's a tongue twister. We expect those results in April of 2023. So we will be meeting again in April. I'm not sure if those results will be back yet, but I'll certainly be asking about those. Some ongoing business. Ms. Crew provided a brief update on continuing changes made to the district's communications as recommended in the recent CCIU audit. Changes were made to the district website and new publications were created. And then regarding events, it is event season. The next few months will be full with community and school-based events. Information will be shared in weekly updates and on our social media channels. Ultimately, the committee did have a few actionable items. We did recommend moving the pedestal replacement to the board agenda. The committee also recommended moving the studio renovation forward once an approved vendor has been secured. So we do have to go through CoStars for that, and once that is confirmed, then we will move forward with that as well. Well, our recommendation will be to move forward with that as well. So our next meeting will be in April. Does anybody have any questions?
When you mention renovations and going through CoStar, what's your definition of renovations?
Is Mr. Rothermel or Ms. Crew, do you want to take that and talk a little bit about the details of that? Because it really was to bring it to a very, how would you call it, would you say, like a very state-of-the-art
So how much does that mean?
How much? How many dollars? Is that what you're asking for? Do you have that note, Karen? I don't have that in front of me.
Sure. The renovations in the studio would be inside the studio area, nothing outside in the TV space where they do the editing. And it's mainly to bring it up to date. Right now, it's a stage and a green screen, which is also essentially a classroom for our broadcast students. So it's not a real life experience for them for what they see when they go into college or go into a career. So the price that Andrew has right now, the first of 3, is roughly $51,000. This is not unbudgeted. I think last week the term was he's squirreling away his money, which he is. He budgets and plans really well. He works closely with Mr. Fink. He utilizes the ITC money first when it comes in so that he can save his funds for these larger type projects. Again, this is the first time the studio would be touched since it was created in August of 2000.
Okay, a long way to get there. So this would come through property, or this is going to be handled outside of property?
I don't know that it would come through property. There would be no need for support from Mr. Hunter's team at all. If you would like to discuss it in property, we certainly can.
Ms. Crew, there was no intention that came out of that meeting for this to go through the facilities. He is able to cover the cost of this, and okay, great. Some of the equipment that would be in there, he would be assembling. I
That's
know.
great.
That's fine. As long as it's not going to touch you, we've got this. So, all right.
Right. Wasn't there recent purchases that were made using EITC money for the TV studio?
Yes, he uses EITC funds every year. I believe the last purchase he did, and Andrew, who I think might be a little bit delayed right now, will teams me if I'm wrong. He typically uses it on camera replacement. I believe he has a 5-year plan for the student equipment. Again, the TV studio is a classroom for our broadcast students. He did teams me. I was completely wrong. He used it for the TriCaster, which is about a $40,000 essentially brain of the entire operation. We have 2. We have one in the studio, and the second one he upcycles into the mobile studio that we have out in the football stadium right now, but our mobile production studio. He uses that for the TriCaster, which I believe is on a 7-year rotation, and he did also use the EITC funds for the camera replacements. But we do try to use that money first before he goes into his budget so that he can save for these larger projects.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, turning it over to Mr. Schaefer for extracurricular.
Okay, thank you. And by the way, I fully support the pivot there. Because there are, from time to time, right, some recommendations from administration that the committee supports for action. So it'd be good to be able to talk about them. So that's a great move. We met last on February the 7th, and we had a presentation. The VEX Robotics clubs were led by Mr. James Eveland, and we had 4 students that came in and demonstrated a device that they had created. They, of course, requested some additional financial support to grow the club's impact, and the committee asked the administration explore and come back with some specifics. Dr. Collier and Dr. Kohler presented on the secondary clubs. That's where the Special Olympics coordinator position came up for discussion that we addressed last week. Also a request for additional clubs to support kids' interest. Dr. Kohler shared some context that I wasn't aware, but that there's an existing process that they have in place where if there's an interest or several kids are expressing an interest to have an extracurricular club, that they have to fill out certain paperwork and activate a proof, and there's a proof of that there's enough kids that would be interested, and there's been a pretty significant increase in clubs, which I think is overall great to see. So there's an action item that was discussed for that. Seth Jones presented on the secondary activities. Obviously we saw, which by the way, this of course happens when I'm not in person, but from what I could tell, staring at my laptop in a hotel room in Atlanta, that was an amazing display of talent by our high school students. So the spring musical in March, which is coming up this weekend. Spring Jamboree is March 17th. March is Music in Our Schools Month. Dan Miscavige presented on high school and middle school sports. The winter sports participation numbers were shared. They were included in the notes. I hope, Mr. Rizzo, if you want to maybe speak before we adjourn. I didn't hear anything about, some of the exciting aspects of our high school teams and their advancement. So if there's an update you'd like to share, I think that would be appropriate. On last to other business, there was a mild discussion and request for administration to look into and explore the addition of a financial report for the district's investment in extracurricular activities. I noted that it was not suggested that this would be something that would be needed for each meeting, but perhaps on a biannual basis because of, in many cases, even as the chair of the committee, I don't have a full picture of what we spend. And I always want to support, but I don't know where we are. Are we above or below what we had budgeted? And it'd be good to get a full picture. We adjourn at 8:35, and the next meeting is this coming Tuesday, March the 7th, 6:30 in the district office. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer. Questions or comments? Okay. Mrs. Deardorff, Legislative Committee.
We had a legislative, the Montgomery County, led by the IU, our legislative committee meeting was on March 15th. We're still kind of finding unique ways to meet and discuss things since there really actually hasn't been, probably up until last week, much work being done in Harrisburg, if any. So we had a guest speaker, Kevin Bashiri from PSBA, who is the Senior Director of Government Affairs, just to talk about the fair funding victory and different ways that that may impact our schools, and to give schools the opportunity to kind of have his ear about what our needs are. So looking forward, the House of Representatives only met in special session last week, but both the House and the Senate are back in regular session starting today. So hopefully I will have some news for you as they get back to work. But of note, on March 7th is when Governor Shapiro plans to present his budget proposal for fiscal year 23-24. And then House budget hearings will start on March 20th. On April 28th, we have a legislative breakfast that I plan to attend as our representative, and I believe Mr. Rizzo, perhaps, legislative breakfast for the legislative committee. I don't know, maybe we're both going, maybe just me, I don't know, we'll see. And that's all I have for legislative.
I don't know if I'm going yet or not.
Okay.
Sorry,
I
I didn't want to interrupt, sorry.
I will be going after work, so it'll be very
I'm
exciting.
going to check the menu first, right?
Yeah, it's at a hotel in KOP, so thank you, that's all I have.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay. Dr. Wright, MCIU.
Thank you very much. The MCIU board meeting was Wednesday, February 22nd. As always, there was a program highlighted. Tina Velletto, the Director of Office of Community and Government Relations, provided the MCIU board and audience with an overview and update on the Office of Community and Government Relations services and initiatives. Dr. Speaker was pleased also to share a letter of congratulations from Pennsylvania State Senator Tracy Penashuik, and I apologize if I mispronounced that, on the recent news of Montgomery County IU securing the Project Aware grant. And Dr. Speaker also introduced to the members from the organization that does our annual audit for the fiscal year ending June 30th for the IU. And the audit firm was pleased to announce that there were no significant findings. So, and let's see, the MCIU board approved a memorandum of understanding between the MCIU and the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit Education Association for extended school year rates. The human resources updates: 15 new employees, 6 resignations, 1 mentor was assigned to the induction program for this school year, and 1 professional contract of a school psychologist. So additionally, the board approved a number of contracted service agreements to support its many trainings, programs, and services provided by the offices of the IU. The next board meeting is Wednesday, March 29th at 6:45. What is of note, however, I do want to make sure we're all aware that Monday, May 15th is the 23rd annual MCIU Education Foundation Golf Classic at Brookside Country Club in Pottstown. I will provide a flyer to the board members regarding that. The money there goes to scholarship students. I think it's with the summer camp program. So that's it.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. Questions, comments? Okay. Mrs. Deardorff, PSBA liaison.
I was going to comment to Dr. Wright. It's exciting that a county initiative is coming out west to Pottstown, because a lot of things don't tend to be close to us. So that's exciting. As far as PSBA goes, Advocacy Day, which is typically a day where school board directors are able to spend time with their legislators in Harrisburg, is actually now going to be virtual this year. It's going to be on April 18th, and it's an opportunity for fellow school board directors, school business managers, and superintendents to meet with our legislators and staff to advocate on behalf of public education and share our district's perspectives. So I think due to the delay in Harrisburg, our state reps are not scheduled to be in Harrisburg on that original day that they scheduled it for, and then our Congress people were waiting for the state reps to get their committees together, so they were unable to commit to that date as well, which I think is why they have moved it to virtual. So there will be a virtual issue briefing about issues of the day and advocacy efforts, all virtual on the 18th, that will be available to us. Coming up, there's also PSBA sectional meetings. I believe that you should have gotten emails about them. There's one being offered regarding safety and security on April 4th, one regarding poverty on April 12th, and then government affairs on April 13th. Those are in person. I tried to look up where they were for you guys just now, and I had to log into my PSBA, and I'd have to ask Ms. Bickert for that information. So another thing coming up on March 22nd is a spring legal roundup. That will be in person in Mechanicsburg, also in Zoom. And then they're also available to all PSBA members. Approximately on March 10th will be their analysis of our governor's budget proposal that will be sent to you all via email. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Mrs. Deardorff. Questions or comments? Okay. Moving on down the list, we have Mr. Schaefer with the American Legion.
Thank you. So since I was I'd say awarded this opportunity to go back and serve with this great group as a former player, I attended 2 meetings. Actually, they met twice. I was able to attend one in January. Relevant topics to report out, I would say it's business as usual for them. There's a few items that I'm exploring for assistance regarding, maintenance with the facility, but nothing of action to be brought up this evening. And there is a meeting I'm scheduled to attend at the end of March. So that is my report for the Legion.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer. Questions or comments? Okay, we will move on to our superintendent's report.
Okay, thank you. A couple of updates. First, Act 80 days. Upon approval of the January minutes, Dr. Murray and I will begin the application process for the Act 80 approval with PDE. Ms. Gardy and her team are already planning to make good use of the additional PD time. We do believe the approved minutes will sufficiently meet the standard of evidence for the Act 80 approval process. Since this is our first time, however, we may need to come back if additional approvals are needed. Teacher Job Fair. Springford is hosting a job fair this upcoming school year on March 1st. That's this Wednesday. Available positions include elementary teachers, secondary teachers, special education teachers, special area teachers, and more. This is a great opportunity for individuals graduating this spring or looking to work in the Springford School District. Check the website, social media accounts, or weekly updates to register. Retirees, we have two. I would like to bring Cheryl Goodwin forward, instructional assistant at the 8th grade center, 6 years of service here at Springford, and Carol Mays, secretary at Upper Providence Elementary for 17 years of service in Springford, totaling between the two of them 20 years serving our Springford students. We want to congratulate both of them. Yep. And as long as we're congratulating, athletic update. Thank you, Mr. Schaefer, for drawing attention to that, and Mr. Miscavige for the information. Boys basketball does advance tomorrow night to PIAA District 1 playoffs. Girls basketball will advance Wednesday night to PIAA District 1 playoffs. Our swim team brought home many titles, including a second-place win in the 200-yard medley relay and second-place win in the 50-yard free. The boys 4x200 relay broke their own track and field school record with a time of 1:30.69 to take home 6th place in the PTFCA state championship. Mason Scott moved up 2 places from his seed to finish 14th in the 200 Open. The boys have qualified to run at New Balance Indoor Nationals in 2 weeks in Boston. The wrestling team saw many wins at the District 1 AAA North Sectional, including 8 individual wins and an overall second-place team win. Top 4 advanced to the AAA Southeast Regional next weekend. 5th-place finishers are alternates. We will likely see many of our teams and athletes next month to be recognized as they continue to advance through their season. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions or comments?
I have a question. Regarding the VEX robotics competition that we had, did we take home any winnings from that? Anybody know?
I do believe that our team fared well. We have multiple teams fared well. I do not believe they brought home any trophies.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions or comments? Bless you. Okay, moving on to Mr. Fitzgerald.
Yes, briefly, there was discussion last week surrounding an item under the programming and curriculum section of the agenda, and specifically letter N. This was the class link one roster discussion. Mr. Schaefer brought up a concern surrounding the 5-year agreement with this organization. Between our discussion last week and this evening, language has been added to that agreement that allows us an out on 30 days notice if it is not meeting our needs. So it does say a 5-year agreement, but the term can be shortened if we find that it is not meeting our needs, 30 days notice.
Anything else, Mr. Fitzgerald?
That is it for me tonight.
Thank you. Questions or comments? All right, so then we will move on to the voting meeting of our agenda with regards to Section 4 minutes, A and B. Do I have a motion? Second? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Mr. Schaefer, I'm going to defer to you so that we can hear you. Aye?
Yeah, aye. Yep.
Okay. Any opposed? That passes 9-0. Oh, I'm sorry, 8-0. Mrs. Earl is not here. 8-0. Moving on to Section 5, personnel, letters A through T.
I had a quick comment about Q and R. Do we need to pull those out?
Yes, so we will separate, you said Q and R?
Yes.
And D2.
And D as well? Is that, okay. Okay, Any others to pull out? Yep, I'll give you a moment. There's a lot of letters. Yeah. D2.
D.
Okay, so right now I have on the table to separate D2, Q, and R. And which one? N as well? And letter N. Okay.
Permission for
D2, N, Q, and R. Anything else to separate out? Okay. So do I have a motion for personnel A through T minus D2, N, Q, and R? Second? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Mr. Schaefer?
That's an aye.
Thank you. That passes 8-0.
And if I could, very quickly, I just want to congratulate Mr. Krakauer, who's in the back of the room. Congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you. So I will just go in alphabetical order. We'll start with D2. Do I have a motion?
Second.
Okay. Questions or comments?
Question. I'm trying to get clarity on the way this is written. So we have a new hire who starts no later than May. The current professional has been given another assignment. So what's happening with the kids in the meantime?
That current teacher has been moved over to her new current assignment. There are some personnel matters that I could certainly share in executive session, should that be necessary. The motion on here reads as May 1st, because the current district may hold her up to 60 days. We do have a substitute in place in the event that she is held for the full 60 days.
So our kids would have their substitutes for the next 2 months?
We're working so that doesn't happen, but we do have something in place in case it does, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments with D2? Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
Okay. Mr. Schaefer?
Aye.
Okay, so that passes 7-1. Moving on to letter N, personnel. Do I have a motion? So moved. Second? Okay, questions or comments?
So I brought this up last week, just that for N and the one that we're going to look at next, just about these positions. But again, these are not new. Well, we'll say let's just take this one, the extended school year ESY coordinator. It's really not a new position. It's a new position, but it's the same cost value, or because it's somebody else getting paid for it right now, but we're actually going to create a position around it. Is that correct?
It is not a new position. This position historically has been paid per hour for their summer work for ESY. We are recommending it change into a coordinator position as a stipend, but the value is the same.
So that's what I wanted to know about. The value is the same.
Yes.
Okay.
Other questions and comments on personnel, letter N? Okay. All those in favor say aye. 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 Any opposed? Mr. Schaefer, I apologize. Thank you.
Aye. You sure? Thanks.
That passes 8-0. Moving on to personnel, letter Q. Do I have a motion? Second? Is there a second? Second. Thank you. Questions and comments?
I did have a comment to make. we discussed this extensively last week, and I realized after reflecting upon the conversation that I missed an opportunity just to share that hosting the Special Olympics here at Springford directly matches our mission statement, which embraces inclusivity. It also provides us an opportunity to recognize athletes. We do that often here. We recognize athletes who excel in their sports. It provides an opportunity for more athletes to use our amazing facilities. It gives an opportunity to not only these students and their families to celebrate their dedication, their perseverance, but it allows our entire community to celebrate with these students. And I also want to just say that we value our teaching staff and our teachers. So the fact that a teacher wants to take on this massive responsibility, we're providing a stipend that is not going to remotely cover the amount of hours that will be involved, but this is a way to say thank you, we appreciate you, and it's just a really clear statement to our staff that we value their time. So I just really thank you for this opportunity as one single board member to say I value this opportunity for our district.
I'd like to echo that also, in that I have been witnessed, attended the Special Olympics in the past in other districts, and it's an overwhelming day. It's a huge undertaking, but on top of that, it is a very emotional day. It's just a wonderful experience, and I'm thrilled that we are taking on this challenge, and I hope that we can continue to do so for many years to come. Thank you.
Thank you both. Any other questions or comments? Okay. All those in favor of personnel letter Q, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Mr. Schaefer?
Aye.
Thank you. That passes 8-0. Okay, moving on to personnel letter R. Do I have a motion? Second? Okay, any questions or comments? Okay, I'm guessing that was satisfied with the previous. So all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Mr. Schaefer?
Aye.
Thank you. That passes 8-0. All right, we are then moving off of personnel, and we are going to finance, section 6, letters A through I. Do we have anything to separate? Okay. Okay, then do I have a motion for finance, section 6, letters A through I? Is there a second? Thank you very much. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Mr. Schaefer?
Aye.
Thank you. That passes 8-0. Moving on to property, section 7, letter A. Do I have a motion? Second? Second. Questions and discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Mr. Schaefer?
Aye.
Thank you. That passes 8-0. Ooh, excuse me. We're moving on to section 8, programming and curriculum, letter A through N.
Could you separate N, please?
Just a quick question, or let me separate N.
Okay, we will separate N. Any others? Okay, then we're looking at programming and curriculum, A through M as in Mary. Do I have a motion?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Mr. Schaefer?
Aye.
Thank you, sir. That passes 8-0. Moving on to programming and curriculum, letter N. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second? Thank you. Questions and discussion?
So, Mr. Fitzgerald, with that, with your review, with the legal review of that and the out, does anything more specific need to be written in this motion, or is that adequate as it is, and that just remains in the contract, or?
It can be noted, at least for the minutes, that we're finalizing the actual language in the agreement, but they've committed to this language in the latest draft that we received today. So I'm comfortable with where we stand under the circumstances.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay. Programming and curriculum, letter N. Do I have a motion? Okay. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed?
I'm opposed.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer. So that passes 7-1. Moving on to conferences and workshops, letters A through G. I would like to separate out letter C. Any others? All right, so do I have a motion to, or should I, excuse me, do I have a motion for letters A, B, D, E, F, and G?
So moved.
Okay. Any questions or discussion? Okay. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Mr. Schaefer?
Aye.
Thank you. That passes 8-0. And then we're going to be looking at conferences and workshops, letter C. Do I have a motion? Second? Okay, questions and discussion? So since I pulled this aside, I have since been notified by Mr. Fitzgerald that there needs to be somewhat of an amendment to this, or some type of revision. So can I defer to you?
Dr. Murray, do you want to explain
Okay.
what the addition is, and then we can effectuate the motion?
Sure. We would like to request to increase this by $400, so the total would be $2,695. We just received notice today that there was a scheduling change which would require one of the attendees to stay an additional night, so we would like to reflect that on the motion so that they can stay an additional night for the choral concert that is occurring on Saturday morning.
Okay, so bottom line, we just need to add $400 additional to the $2,295 that's noted in item C. So what we would need is an amendment to this motion to add the additional $400.
And with the current motion on the floor.
We're good with that
We're
for
good with
now.
that.
So we're going to do the amendment,
Okay.
add the additional $400,
Got it.
and then we will kind of vote twice. We're going to vote on the amendment and then vote on the underlying motion.
Got it. Okay, so is there a motion to amend action item C to state, change the dollar amount from $2,295 to $2,695? Do I have a motion? A second? All those in favor say aye. Oh, no. Questions and discussion?
We're going to have to see if there's any public comment on the $400.
Public comment, right, correct. Any public comment, please approach the podium with your name and township of residence. I think we're good.
I think we're good.
Okay.
Questions here, though? I have a question.
Yeah, absolutely. You
Yes,
can ask.
questions and comment.
Shouldn't this have been amended at the beginning of the meeting?
No, because we're not amending the overall agenda to include an item that, isn't on the agenda. We're just modifying a current agenda item. So we would do it within the action item here.
Thank you, Mrs. Zastowski. Any other questions? Okay. So all those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Mr. Schaefer?
Aye.
Thank you. So the amendment passes 8-0. And so now we're going to be voting on the actual motion, which will state Yvonne Day, choir director, and Emily Granahan, orchestra director, to attend PMEA All-State Conference in Pocono Manor, PA, April 19th through the 21st of 2023. The total cost of the conference is $2,695. Registration, transportation, hotel, and meals. Substitute coverage is needed. Do I have a motion? Oh,
We
no.
can just vote.
Just vote. All right, all those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Mr. Schaefer?
Aye.
Thank you, that passes 8-0. Okay. Moving on to other business, A and B. C is only a first read, so section 10, A and B.
So moved.
Questions and discussion? All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Mr. Schaefer?
Excuse me, I'm sorry. This is the problem with the Zoom thing. So are we on other business right now?
We are, sir. Other business, section A and B. We have a motion, a second on the table. All those in favor say aye.
Thank you, I'm an aye.
Thank you. So that passes 8-0. Okay, which moves us to board comment. Is there any board comment?
I have a comment. I was very pleased to hear that Mr. Krakauer will now be the new principal at the 7th grade temporarily for at the 7th grade center. And I just did not know if we had any information on when that would go into effect. I'm sure he will be missed coming from the high school, but I know that the teachers, the staff, the students will be very excited to have him starting at the 7th grade center. Any timeline?
It's technically to be determined, as I mentioned before. So it's he's going to move over to the 7th grade temporary principal position once the teacher on special assignment can be moved into the 9th grade house principal position, which is determined by when we can get a long-term sub into that position. So it's kind of to be determined, but it will be an ASAP.
So is that going to require us to wait until next month to have a vote?
No.
Because it would be a TOSA, so it would not?
Correct.
Okay, great. Well, congratulations again, and looking forward to seeing the impact that you'll make for the students in that building.
Thank you. Other board comment?
I just wanted to, I don't know if it would now would be where to say it or not, so I'll just say it now since it's in public. I really love the idea that Mrs. Zowski had about having a town hall meeting regarding full-day kindergarten if we get to that point, because I do think it's important to do some community outreach about this, because in my opinion, I think there's a lot of people who are not yet in the catchment of the district, as their kids aren't old enough yet, who should have an opportunity to hear this and voice, you know, their opinions on that as well.
Thank you, Mrs. Deardorff. Any other board comment?
How about the guy from his hotel in Atlanta? Briefly, just to, you know, for this kindergarten, full day kindergarten exploration, I would love to participate in my 10 or so months left in creatively exploring how to do this with no financial impact. In other words, if it's going to be a $4 million increase, then let's figure out how to save $4 million. So, you know, asking if administrators or educators would support full day kindergarten. I mean, it's tough not to support it. I think it's just, the reality is somebody has to pay for it. So sign me up if there's special meetings to explore how can we cut $4 million, and I'm all in. Thank you.
I'm with you, Mr. Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer. Mrs. Zazowski, any other board comment? Okay. With that said, we are going to move to public to be heard. This is not simply on agenda items on any topic. Do we have anyone in the room that would like to approach the podium? If so, please state your name and township of residence.
Michael Lebedzinski, Limerick Township. So just a couple of observations on the full-day kindergarten. I think I saw the number 17%, Mr. Rizzo, in terms of the incremental number of kindergartners who would join. So I think 20%, adding a little bit of overhead to that. I'm curious, given the timeline of the feasibility study and the build, what would be the intersection on the curve with ICS's projected, right? They said that the enrollment will peak in 2 years and then decline thereafter. So I'm wondering when that decline consumes 20% of the enrollment or 17% of the enrollment, freeing up, because beyond that inflection point, all of the money that you just invested, there's lower residual because there's fewer students taking advantage of that. So it's like if you've lived in your house for 20 years and your kids are, you're becoming an empty nester, you don't add, capital investment given that you're going to be moving out potentially. There's a couple other, I'm just wondering where we're going to find these 34 students or 34 additional educators given that we struggle with staffing today. I was glad to see the reference to bathrooms in the classrooms. The SpaceX launch was at 1:45 last night, so I had 3 hours to read the studies. So I was happy that Dr. Murray brought up the one of the studies I think you looked at was the Nevada study. So it was interesting. I don't know if you caught the graph in Clark County and Wausau County where they actually compared private half-day kindergarten scores in reading and math proficiency. They compared them to full-day and half-day public school. And I don't know if you caught that graph, but the numbers were interesting. The other thing I'll just mention for completeness, not only did Springford do a study 4 years ago, 2019 I think you said, but Central Bucks has done several studies around this and found no incremental benefit, academic benefit. And then of course PV, our closest neighbor here, did a study 2 years ago and found no additional benefit, academic benefit. That's all I had, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else that would like to approach the podium?
Hi, good evening. Mary Jo McNamara, Limerick Township. So with regard to the full-day kindergarten presentation, thank you very much. It was super helpful and insightful to see how it was broken out by each one of the areas, right? I think for the whole community, it was great from a kind of getting some information. With that said, there were a couple of items, right? I think Mr. Hunter's presentation was based on a 20-person optimal classroom size, or 20-person classroom size that we do today. However, like the first sentence of the first slide was, there is benefit to be gained by reduction in class size overall to 17. So while I recognize everything was done separately, it would be good to have some cohesiveness in those things just to go back and adjust or whatever, make note of, right? Another point to that is I am glad that there was reiteration over and over again about not making any decisions. This was fact-finding. There's things that need to be done, right? I was at a Home and School Association meeting in the 7th grade center where there were 2 principals and 3 parents that both talked about the full-day kindergarten and made references to redistricting. So I know that your community has a sense of this is great, it's coming. And so it's good to keep reiterating there's a lot of work that we need to do behind. Another item that I'd just like to comment on is the Wellness First Read policy doesn't have the AR attached to it. I don't know if that's our regular business, but the AR's got some really interesting things in it about giving our nurses the ability to do individual interventions and identifying words like other mental health professionals, being able to do risk assessments on our children. And it's not very specific, and I understand we want to be broad for our benefit, but there's some pretty interesting things in that AR, and I would suggest that the board republish the agenda with the AR attached to it, or let your public know that there's an AR that they should read to be prepared to, if they want to comment. The last thing I would say is that a Limerick Township supervisor meeting, there was a developer that came up and talked about building apartments at the cemetery, and that our district provided 7 acres of land from this board, 7 acres of land to support the storm management so they could move forward and build apartments. So I'm just curious who, where, and when did that come from? It was a pretty interesting comment. Thank you.
That was really not us.
Before we move on to final comment, I want to make sure we address everyone in the room, but we definitely can have Mr. Rizzo speak to that because that is unequivocally false.
Hi, Teresa Westwood, Royersford, PA. I have to press it again, sorry. Thank you for the presentation on the full-day kindergarten. It was really interesting to dive in a little bit deeper beyond the presentation that we saw in January in the fall. I think, I'll use the language I think Dr. Wright used. I think the presentation spurred more questions for me in a good way, but just trying to understand how other school districts locally have actually implemented this, because I imagine they too had to deal with the cost, and how could we or did they offset that? I think too, as others mentioned, making the decision in a vacuum with all the other decisions we need to make, like Spring City, et cetera, is probably very challenging, but appreciate the quick work that was done by a lot of people to pull together the assessment. I also think there should be a consideration of not just initial costs and annual revenue, but what about the net present value of the investment over time? What about the other benefits that are not just financial? What does that look like for other local districts? That would be interesting to understand. And I think the other thing that was mentioned is just really looking at, and it seems like this is the opinion of some folks on the board, but staff perceptions. I really did like the town hall idea, because I don't know how many parents are listening or here presently that actually have students that might be in a position in the next couple years where they're going to have to make this decision of what they do for half or full day. And the outside research, I think, will be helpful. It sounds like it's pretty complex. It is not my area of expertise personally, but interesting to look at that research in a couple of different angles, including socioeconomic, among other different angles. So thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to approach a podium?
Good evening. I'm Stephen Wagner. I live in Upper Providence Township. I appreciate all the hard work you guys do. This is a tough job. My primary concern about changing to full-day kindergartens is the impact on the students. I'm a father of 5 children. Right now, according to your presentation, the small children, are spending about 2.5 hours in school away from their parents, being taught by people who aren't their parents, who may have completely different values than their parents. I think at such a young, impressionable age, I think it's very important that the parents have a lot of input into what their students are being taught, the curriculum, the moral values, the lack of moral values. School districts should be teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic. I noticed when you changed to full-day kindergarten that you still have reading, writing, and arithmetic. Didn't look like you're adding anything else significant, extending those by a few minutes for each period. And then the cost factor, maybe $4 million a year as a contractor. 2x4s were $9.85 about 6 months ago. They're $3.89 now. Takes thousands and thousands and thousands of them to build buildings or any other type of materials. You're projecting these costs based on what prices are today. You have no idea what the prices are going to be like in the near future. You're spending my money, you're spending my kids' money, you're spending the taxpayers' money. Perkiomen and Valley said that there's no benefit to going to a full day for kindergarten. I'd like you to seriously consider these things. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to approach a podium? Okay. So before we move to a motion to adjourn, Mr. Rizzo, as having ability to make final comment and just clarify a couple things.
Yeah, sure. First, let me address the policy, the wellness policy that's on for approval. Policy 246. We do have administrative regulations for those. That is a public-facing document. That is not, however, a document that the board approves. That is something that the board authorizes the administration to develop through the policy, and then we adopt those internally. We create those internally, and we have done that. And we kind of teased it out. We did work with Fox Rothschild to tease those out and kind of have them separate, policy separate from the ARs. And the language specific to some of the services that we provide, the mental health services, are things that have already been articulated elsewhere on our website or in our documentation. We just brought it in there as it made sense, and there was a request from the committee to do so. But we will continue to review those. It is a public-facing document, so we'll get that up. It's just not on the agenda because the board doesn't approve that. That's just something that we create to support and bring the policy to life. So we will review those regularly, actually. The second part was the Limerick Township meeting. The developer that had said that we were going to give them X amount of acres of property for green space. We were aware of the developer. We were aware of the developer's ask, but we did not in any way, shape, or form offer up any property. They approached us. We listened to them, and that was the extent of it. We cannot give property away without board action, public board action, so whatever is out there is false. If we were going to go that direction, there'd be a lot of discussion at this table before we would take any action like that.
I mean, if you want to clarify, if you're selling property to a third party for fair market value, you would need the Court of Common Pleas to approve it. So any suggestion that any sort of sale has occurred, we haven't heard about it, and it would require multiple levels of approval by this board and the courts.
Thank you. Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Second.